There's a bench in a small square in Santa Teresa, Rio de Janeiro, that I sat on for 2 nights in a row. Not sat on briefly, sat on through the night, with a bag at my feet that had my passport and my phone and $430 in cash and nothing else of significance. The square has a fountain that does not work and a tree that is large enough to provide shade in the day and a kind of company at night. The specific presence of something old and rooted and indifferent to the situation of the man sitting under it. The neighborhood is quiet after midnight. The city below makes a sound that is not quite silence and not quite noise, but something in between, the ambient hum of a place that never fully sleeps. I had slept in cockpits at 35,000 feet for 35 years. I had never slept on a bench. I did not sleep on the bench either, as it turned out, but I sat there through 2 nights with the specific alertness of a man who understands that his situation has become something he did not plan for, and that planning is now the only way out of it. Okay. I was 69 years old. I had left Denver 3 years earlier with $640,000 and a certainty that the next chapter of my life was going to look like something worth having lived. I was sitting on a bench in Santa Teresa with $800 and an expired lease and a woman named Isabela who had stopped answering her phone 11 days ago. My name is Harold Stevens. Everyone calls me Hal. I was born in 1954 in Colorado Springs, the son of a career Air Force officer who flew F-86 in Korea and who communicated his opinion about what men should do with their lives primarily through the specific quality of his attention when the subject of aviation came up, which was different from his attention at other times, more alive, more precise, more present. I understood by the time I was 10 that flying was the thing he respected most, and that his respect was the thing I wanted most, and that these two facts pointed in a single direction. I joined the Air Force at 22, flew for 8 years, transitioned to commercial aviation in 1984, and joined United Airlines as a first officer. I made captain in 1991. I flew international routes for most of my career, Pacific, transatlantic, South America. I knew airports the way some people know cities. I knew the specific quality of arrival in a dozen countries, the particular light of different latitudes at different times of year, the way a city looks from approach altitude at night, when the grid of its lights tells you something about its structure before you have seen it from the ground. I had seen Rio from the air many times. Coming in from the north on the approach to Galeão, the city appears between the hills and the bay in a configuration that is objectively the most dramatic urban approach in my experience of 40 years of approaches. The hills, the water, the density of the city compressed between them, the specific quality of the light on the bay at certain hours. I had seen it from approach altitude many times, and I had thought more than once I should see that from the ground. I retired in June 2019 at 65. The ceremony at O'Hare was the standard one, a water cannon salute on the last arrival, photographs with the crew, a reception in the crew lounge with people I had flown with for decades. I stood at the window of the crew lounge afterward and looked at the tarmac and thought, I have been in this building or one like it almost every week for 35 years. I will not be in it next week. The thought had a specific quality I cannot fully name. Not grief exactly, not relief exactly. The specific orientation of a man who has been pointing in one direction for 35 years and is now facing open ground. My wife Sandra and I had divorced in 2012. 24 years of marriage, 2 sons, Ryan, 40, in Seattle, and Greg, 37, in Austin. The divorce was the result of what Sandra called, with the precision she always brought to difficult subjects, an accumulation. She said, "It's not one thing, Hal. It's all of it over time." She was right about that. The schedule, the absences, the specific way that a career in aviation shapes a marriage around itself rather than the other way around. We had made it work for 24 years, and then, in the specific way of things held together by structure rather than choice, stopped being able to make it work when Greg left for college and the structure changed. Sandra remarried in 2015. I did not. I lived alone in Denver in a house that was too large for one person and that I maintained with the disciplined purposelessness of a man who has spent his adult life surrounded by colleagues and procedures and is now surrounded by neither. I played golf twice a week. I had dinner with my neighbor Frank on Thursdays. I spoke to Ryan and Greg on the phone with a regularity that I recognized after retirement as the closest thing I had to a schedule. I sold the house in March 2020. Bad timing in some ways, the pandemic just beginning, but the sale had been in motion for months and the buyer did not withdraw. After the sale and the mortgage payoff and the costs, I had $410,000. Combined with the United pension lump sum I had taken and the savings accumulated over 35 years of captain's pay, the total was $640,000. I moved into a furnished apartment in Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood and waited for the world to open back up. It opened in 2021. In September of that year, I booked a flight to Rio, one way. Ryan said, "One way?" I said, "I'll buy the return when I'm ready." He said, "Dad, you sold the house. You don't have somewhere to come back to." I said, "I know." He was quiet. Then he said, "Okay." He said it the way people say okay when they have decided that further argument will not help. Greg said, "Have you been to Rio before?" I said, "Many times from the air." He said, "That's not the same thing." I said, "I know." He said, "Okay, Dad, be careful." I arrived in September 2021. I had been to the city from the air many times, and I was not prepared for it from the ground. The scale of it is different when you are in it rather than above it. The hills are larger, the water is more immediate, the heat is total in a way that altitude conceals. I checked into a hotel in Santa Teresa. I had chosen Santa Teresa deliberately for the specific quality of the neighborhood that I had read about, and that turned out to be accurate. Older, quieter than the beach neighborhoods, with the particular atmosphere of a place that has been many things over a long time and has arrived at something like itself. I spent the first 2 weeks walking. I walked every street in Santa Teresa and then the streets connecting it to the neighborhoods below. I went to Lapa on a Tuesday evening because I had read that Lapa was where the music was, and I found this to be true. The arches, the clubs, the specific alive quality of a neighborhood that has organized itself around the idea of people being in it at night. I went into a club on the second street I tried, smaller than the others, with a jazz quartet playing something that owed more to Brazilian choro than to American jazz. And that was, for that reason, considerably more interesting than either. I sat at the bar. A woman 2 seats down was listening to the music with the full attention of someone who is not performing enjoyment, but experiencing it. She was 31 years old, dark hair, dark eyes, the specific quality of stillness that certain people have when they are genuinely absorbed by something. Between songs, she looked over and said in Portuguese, something I did not understand. I said in English, "I'm sorry, I don't speak Portuguese yet." She switched to English without hesitation and said, "I said the bassist is extraordinary, don't you think?" I listened. The bassist was extraordinary. I said so. Her name was Isabela. She had grown up in Flamengo, studied music at a federal university, and was now teaching private piano lessons and playing occasional gigs with a small ensemble that did corporate events and private parties. She talked about music the way I talked about flying, with the specific authority of someone for whom a thing is not a hobby but a language, the primary way they understand the world. She knew things about the quartet playing in front of us that I would not have known to notice, and that, once she pointed them out, changed what I was hearing. We talked through 3 sets. When the club closed at 2 in the morning, we stood outside on the Lapa street in the warm night and talked for another hour. She knew the city the way musicians know cities, not by neighborhood or landmark, but by sound, by the specific acoustic quality of different streets and squares, by where the music was and what kind and why. I went back to the club on Thursday. She was there. We talked again. On Saturday, I asked if she would have dinner with me, and she said yes with the directness of someone who makes decisions quickly when the decision is clear to her. I extended my hotel stay from 2 weeks to 2 months. In November, I rented an apartment in Santa Teresa, a 2-bedroom in a building from the 1940s with thick walls and high ceilings, and a small garden visible from the kitchen window where the landlord grew herbs he distributed to the tenants with the generosity of someone who has more than he needs and understands what to do about that. The rent was $2,200 a month. I signed a 12-month lease. What? Isabela came to the apartment for dinner in the first week. She brought wine and stayed until midnight, and when she left, I stood at the window for a while and listened to Santa Teresa at that hour and thought, this is the city I saw from approach altitude for 20 years. I am finally in it. The first year was the year I understood what I had been missing in Denver. Not specifically, not Rio, not Isabela, not the jazz club in Lapa, or the Santa Teresa apartment, but the quality of life that those things produced, the specific texture of days that had something in them. Isabela performed twice a month, and I went to every performance. We ate at places she chose and at places I chose, and at the Sunday market in Gloria, where the food was laid out on long tables in the open air and where we spent 2 hours most Sundays working through it slowly. We went to Parody for a long weekend in March, a colonial town on the coast, cobblestone streets, the specific beauty of a place that has been preserved by not having been modernized, and she played piano at a small bar there on the Saturday night, and I sat in the back and watched the room watch her and thought, I came here from the air. This is better. The money moved during the first year in ways I tracked with the reasonable attention of a man who has enough that he is not worried and not enough that he can be careless. The apartment at $2,200, living expenses, the markets, the restaurants, the travel. Isabela's piano needed servicing in February, a Yamaha upright she kept in her own apartment in Gloria, which needed tuning, and then, when the tuner looked more closely, a more significant repair to the action on the upper register, $4,000. I paid it without the payment feeling significant. Her mother's medication in April. Donna Teresa was diabetic, and her insulin and the specific formulation her doctor had prescribed was not covered by the public system and cost $1,200 a month. I started paying it in April and continued paying it for the remainder of the time I was in Rio. Over 3 years, that was a significant sum that I will not calculate here because the calculation produces a number that still surprises me when I look at it. In June, Isabela told me she wanted to record an album. She had the material, compositions she had been working on for 4 years, a specific sound she had developed between the jazz and choro influences she had grown up with. She had a producer she trusted. The studio time and mixing and mastering and the physical production of a limited run would cost $38,000. She had $8,000. She was not asking me, she said. She was telling me about something she wanted and could not figure out how to have. I gave her $30,000, not as a gift. as an investment in something I believed in, which is a distinction that feels meaningful when you make it and less meaningful afterward. She made the album. It was good. I am not qualified to assess it technically, but I know what I felt listening to it, and what I felt was that it was the work of someone who had been building towards something for years and had arrived at it. The album sold modestly. The investment returned nothing financially. It returned something else that I cannot fully account for and that I am not sure how to include in a ledger. The second year was when things began, very gradually, to change in ways I did not name accurately while they were changing. Isabela was as present as she had been in the first year, at the apartment most evenings, at the Sunday market, at the performances. But there was a quality of attention that was different in the second year, a slight reduction in the specific focused quality that had characterized the first year. Not absence, a modulation, the way a frequency changes without the change being immediately registerable. I told myself it was the natural settling of a relationship past the first year's intensity. I had been in a 24-year marriage. I knew that intensity modulates. I did not examine the modulation closely because I had decided it was natural, and natural things do not require examination. The requests continued. In the second year, they were larger and more frequent. Her brother Eduardo needed money for a legal matter, a property dispute that required a lawyer for 6 months, $22,000. I paid it over 3 months. Her cousin's son needed a medical procedure that the public system had on a 9-month waiting list, and that a private clinic could do in 3 weeks. $14,000. I paid it. The apartment building in Gloria, where Isabela lived, needed emergency structural work. The building association had assessed each owner for their share. $18,000. I paid it. Each payment was individual. Each had a reason. None of them on their own was a number I could not absorb. Together, across 2 years, they were a number I was not calculating. In the third year, Isabela suggested we open a joint account. She framed it practically. She was tired of the back and forth of transfers between accounts, the delays, the fees. A joint account would simplify the shared expenses, the groceries, the utilities we split, the occasional travel. It made sense as she described it. I had shared finances with Sandra for 24 years. A joint account was not an unusual thing. I opened the account in March of the third year. I transferred $40,000 into it as the initial balance, enough for 6 months of shared expenses at the level we were living. Isabela had access. I had access. It was, as she had described it, practical. In April, she began to be less available. Not dramatically, nothing that constituted an obvious signal. But the evenings at the apartment became 4 per week instead of 6. The Sunday market became every other Sunday. She was busy with a new teaching arrangement, she said. A music school in Barra had offered her a position, and she was working out the schedule. I said, "That's good." She said, "Yes. It's a lot to manage at first." In May, she canceled 2 evenings in a row. In June, she missed the Sunday market 3 weeks running. I asked if everything was all right. She said yes, the school was demanding more than she had expected. She was tired. I said I understood. I did not press. I had lived with Sandra long enough to know that pressing a person when they are pulling back rarely produces the results you want and usually produces a worse one. In July, I noticed the joint account balance. I had not looked at it closely since April. I looked at it in July because I received a notification from the bank about a large transfer, and I opened the app to see what it was. The balance was $4,200. It had been $40,000 in March. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I went through the transaction history. The money had moved in 12 transfers between March and July. None of the transfers went to accounts I recognized from our shared expenses. The transfers went to 3 different accounts whose names meant nothing to me. The largest single transfer was $11,000 made on a Wednesday in May at 11 in the morning when I had been at a dentist appointment in Ipanema. I called Isabela. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice had the specific quality of someone who has been waiting for a call and has prepared for it. I said, "I need to talk to you about the joint account." She said, "I know." I said, "Can you come to the apartment?" She said, "Yes." She said she would come that evening. She did not come that evening. She did not come the following day. By the end of the 2nd day, I had called 11 times. She answered once, briefly, saying she needed more time. She would explain. She did not explain. By the end of the 3rd day, the calls were going to voicemail. By the end of the 1st week, the voicemail was full. By the end of the 2nd week, the number had been disconnected. I went to her apartment in Gloria. The buzzer went unanswered. The building manager, when I found him, said the tenant in her apartment had moved out 3 weeks prior. He said, "The woman with the piano?" I said, "Yes." He said, "She had movers come on a Thursday. Everything went." He thought she had gone back to family somewhere in the interior. He did not know where. I went to the music school in Barra. There was no music school at the address she had given me. There was a real estate office and a pharmacy and a cafe. I went to the studio where she had recorded the album. The producer said he had not heard from her in 8 months. He said, "Is everything okay?" I said I was trying to reach her. He gave me an old number I already had. I went to the police. The officer who took my report was patient and thorough, in the way that police officers are patient and thorough when they know the likely outcome and want to be decent about it. He said joint account fraud was a common pattern. He said the accounts the money had gone to would have been opened specifically for this purpose and would have been closed after the transfers cleared. He said the name Isabela da Costa was registered at the Gloria address I already had, which was now vacant. He said he would file the report. He said recovery was possible, but not common. I walked out of the police station into the Rio afternoon and stood on the sidewalk and did what I had not done in the 2 weeks since I first saw the joint account balance. I calculated the full amount. The apartment at $2,200 a month for 36 months. Living expenses across 3 years. Conservative estimate because I had not been conservative, but the closest I could get. The piano repair, Donna Teresa's insulin across 36 months, the album, Eduardo's lawyer, the cousin's medical procedure, the building assessment, the smaller things, the trips, the Sunday markets, the performances, the restaurant dinners, the things that accumulate when you are living rather than counting. The joint account, $35,800 missing from $40,000 deposited, $619,000 in 3 years. I had $21,000 left in my personal account. My apartment lease had expired 2 weeks earlier, and I had not renewed it because I had been intending to discuss with Isabela whether we should find a larger place together. The landlord, Seu Benedito, the man who grew herbs in the garden, had been patient. He said I could stay week to week while I figured things out. I figured things out for 2 more weeks on a week-to-week basis. Then Seu Benedito, who was genuinely kind and who I do not blame for any of this, Said he had a family coming who needed the apartment and he needed 2 weeks' notice. I said I understood. I said I needed a few days to find something. I had $21,000, no lease, in a city I had lived in for 3 years that was, without the apartment and without Isabela, a different city from the one I thought I knew. I looked at options. A cheap hotel in Lapa cost $80 a night. I could afford that for a while, but not indefinitely. A hostel in Santa Teresa was $40 a night. I booked the hostel for a week while I figured out whether I was staying or going. The going required a flight, and flights from Rio to Denver were $1,200, and $1,200 was money I was now counting carefully. I called Ryan. He answered on the first ring, which is how I knew he had been waiting for the call. I told him what had happened, briefly, the way I tell things when I do not want to explain them and have to anyway. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, come home. I'll send you the flight money right now." As I said, "Give me a few more days." I needed the few more days for reasons I cannot fully articulate. Not because I thought things would resolve. They were not going to resolve. Not because I thought Isabela would reappear. She had made her decision with the precision of someone who had planned it rather than made it impulsively. I needed the few more days because leaving felt like the final acknowledgement that 3 years had been what they were, and I was not ready to make that acknowledgement in the specific way that buying a return ticket makes it. Después, the hostel had a curfew I kept missing because I walked at night instead of sleeping. I walked the Santa Teresa streets I had walked for 3 years, the streets I knew by now with the specific familiarity of someone who has lived somewhere long enough that the streets have become part of how he thinks. The square with the broken fountain, the viewpoint where you could see the city and the bay together, the street where the music came out of the bar on weekends. On the second night, I sat on the bench in the square for a while because the hostel was loud and the square was quiet. On the third night, I sat there longer. On the fourth night, I brought a bag, my passport, my phone, some cash, because I had miscalculated the hostel curfew and the door was locked and I did not want to wake anyone. I sat on that bench until 5 a.m. when the city began to wake up and a man selling coffee from a cart came through the square and I bought a cup and we sat in companionable silence for 20 minutes while the light changed over the hills. Then I called Ryan and told him to send the ticket. He sent it that morning. I flew out on a Wednesday. The approach from Rio was the same approach I had made from the cockpit many times. The hills, the bay, the city between them, the specific light on the water at that time of day. From the window seat, it looked different from how it looks from the cockpit. Lower and more personal. The city that had been a landmark for 35 years of approaches was now a place I had lived in and lost something in and was leaving. I watched it until the clouds came between the window and the ground. Then I put on my headphones and watched the coast of Brazil become the Atlantic and thought about what Ryan would say when I landed and what I would say back. Ryan picked me up at Denver International. He looked at me the way sons look at fathers when they are trying to assess how bad things are without asking directly. I said, "I'm okay." He said, "I know, Dad." He said it with the specific gentleness of someone who is not sure it's true but has decided that saying it is the right thing for now. I am in Seattle. Ryan's house, the second bedroom, with a view of the Sound on clear days that is not the view from the Santa Teresa apartment, but that is, in its own way, extraordinary. I have been here 4 months. We have talked, Ryan and I and Greg, when he came up from Austin in February, about what happened. Not in the way of assigning blame, though blame is available and has its place, but in the way of trying to understand a thing accurately so that the understanding can be useful. I had 35 years of aviation. In aviation, when something goes wrong, the procedure is not to find blame, but to find the cause, the specific sequence of decisions and conditions that produce the outcome so that the sequence can be understood and the outcome prevented the next time. We called it the accident chain. Every accident has a chain. The links look small individually. Together, they are catastrophic. Gotta go. My accident chain in Rio. I came with money and no schedule and a need I had not named. I met someone who filled the need. I stopped applying to my own situation the same analysis I would have applied to anything else. I extended trust in ways that were not irrational link by link, but that were, in the aggregate, a chain I did not see until it was complete. I am not the first pilot to understand something perfectly in theory and fail to apply it when the conditions were wrong. That is, in fact, the central insight of aviation safety, that knowledge and application are different things, and that the gap between them is where most accidents live. I had $640,000, and I have $21,000 in a bedroom in Ryan's house, and a view of Puget Sound on clear days. I had Isabela for 3 years, or I had something that was called Isabela for 3 years, and now I have the memory of it and the knowledge that memory and the thing remembered are not the same. The music was real. The jazz club in Lapa on a Tuesday night with the bassist who was extraordinary was real. The parody weekend was real. The album she made was real. I still have it, the physical copy, in the bag I brought from Rio. I play it sometimes. It is good. Whatever she was or was not, she made something good. That is a complicated thing to hold, but I am getting better at holding complicated things. I saw Rio from the air for 20 years. Then I lived in it for 3. The view from the ground was better than the view from approach altitude. I would not trade that even now. Even with the bench in the square at 4 in the morning and the coffee from the cart and the ticket Ryan sent on a Wednesday morning. Some approaches are harder than others. You still have to make them. I am still making this one.